Ross Noble here, and I'm on this show right now.
Hi, it's Rochelle Hughes.
Hi, I'm Astro, and I'm Alex from UB40.
Hello, it's Amanda Holmes here.
Thursday breakfast on Source FM with Benjamin Makin. To the show, welcome to the show, welcome to the show, welcome. Yeah. I was just giving that a little try. I'm not going to use that. I'm really sorry about that. Anyway, a very warm welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me. It's Ben Makin here. It's your Thursday morning. It's your late breakfast show now. Science and Celebrity late breakfast show. Right, I've got two very, very special guests on the show with me today, so I'm really excited about this. Two topics, actually, that I don't often cover. Railways and gardening, right? So what on earth am I talking about? Well, hear me out. Got two amazing TV presenters with me. Tim Dunn, first of all. He's talking about his brand new series on UK TV on Yesterday Channel called The Architecture the Railways Built. It's all about Tim basically exploring lots of disused and secret locations. One of the episodes, actually, and I won't give too much away. We'll chat with Tim in a minute. One of the episodes sees Tim actually using a disused tube station. And then, do we have any fans of gardening out there? We've got Mark Lane, the presenter of the BBC's Gardener's World, joining us to give us some gardening tips and also some kind of mindfulness tips as well that Mark uses to chill out in his own garden at home. So this could be pretty useful for you if you want to just, get a bit chillaxed, as they say, out in your lovely garden. Well, this is how to do it. Right, okay, let's get started with the show. First of all, I'd like to invite Tim Dunn. Here he is. Great to hear you, Tim. Thanks for coming on the show with us.
Oh, thank you.
And, first of all, Tim, how have you been holding up during these very bizarre times, aren't they? How have you been?
I'm very good. I mean, I live in central London, probably very different to where you live. But no, I mean, I live in London Bridge, so it's London is very quiet right now, but I've got everything I need on my doorstep. I've got a little balcony facing the sun, so not today, but it's all right. How about you guys in Cornwall? Must be interesting.
It is, yeah. We can still kind of hear the seagulls from the beach, so it's kind of like a taunt. We can't go to the beach, but we can hear them. Can't wait for a pasty, I'll tell you that.
I must admit, whereabouts are you based in Cornwall?
I'm down in Helston, so the station is actually in Penzance, which is basically Land's End. Don't know if you've ever been as far as that.
Oh my God! I've been to Helston loads of times, and I'm down to Penzance and to Senham Cove a lot. I mean, I come down to Cornwall a lot. But great, Helston! Oh, that is lovely.
Yeah, there's a bunch of lovely pubs. Not that we can go at the moment, obviously, around in the area, but cannot wait to get back to them. I can tell you that, Tim.
You and me both.
Yeah. Anyway, Tim, thanks so much. I'd love to talk a bit about, if it's okay with you, your brand new series on UK TV, which is actually dropping today, isn't it? The first episode.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Are you recording this, or does a pre-record to go out today?
Yeah, pre-record going out today, if that's all right.
So. Oh, fine. So it was the 10th, just so I can find. Yeah. So it's it starts tonight on Yesterday Channel, and it's every Tuesday. It's 10 episodes of lovely, wonderful behind-the-scenes stuff of this glorious railway buildings and engineering.
Because I think it's something that probably everyone has noticed. Going into a particular station, everyone can probably think of one station that springs to mind. I think, that is quite an impressive structure.
Yeah, I mean, across the West Country, there are dozens of glorious and interesting railway stations. But I think actually that's the thing. We often think about the really iconic ones like Bristol Temple Meads or St Pancras or Paddington or the really big ones. But actually, what I think the series does, it tries to find some of those hidden gems, those little interesting corners you might not have noticed. And that's what I hope we actually start doing. We perhaps take a little bit more time, take a minute or two to look around us and look up or look around a corner and see the design behind some of these buildings, because every one of them is, or most of them anyway, are fascinating little buildings to look at along the way.
Yeah, and there's something just so cool, isn't there, about kind of hidden and kind of secret areas. I mean, I don't want to give anything away at all. I've got some kind of some examples of the kind of secret things you'll be looking at. I'm not going to give any of those away. Leave it to you if you want to say any of them. But I mean, it's kind of obvious for people why that's awesome, right? I mean, come on, let's just think of Harry Potter, right? That's the secret place, right? That kicks off the whole thing, going through the secret into the secret station.
Yeah, I would actually say we in one episode we actually go to King's Cross, where of course they have platform 9 3/4.
Of course.
and if you've been to King's Cross, they've actually established a little tourist attraction down where platform 9 3/4 should literally technically be, between platform 9 and platform 10. And as you're going to go point your little wand at it. But no, we actually go up into the clock tower in King's Cross, and
wow.
so, to have the chance. I mean, all these things I've known. Or most of them I've known existed, because that's my job as a railway historian. I have to understand buildings and places and systems, and so I've researched them in the past. But to actually take people into them and go in there with a camera crew, I mean, it's just, this is the high point of my career, frankly. Like going up into this turret and so looking out from this little turret above King's Cross Station, inside, inside the main roofs, looking out across. Well, one, it's terrifying, but two, it's brilliant. Just to go and sort of understand why it was built like that and how it was built, brick by brick, into these very dusty places, and going up onto like St Pancras roof and standing there and looking down and going, oh, there's Eurostar under my feet. Is slightly terrifying, but it's such a privilege to be able to go on these places and then take people with you, because often as a person and as a working with a railway, I get to go to these things, but it's then you get to go and share it and put it on telly, and you meet these amazing experts too. Like tonight, we meet an amazing woman called Siddy Holloway, who's a historian of the Underground, and she gives like a one-to-one tour of this used tube station. I mean, it's just lovely and brilliant, and we meet so many interesting people who are passionate about their little corner of the railway systems. It's just lovely.
Sounds like an awesome adventure. And Tim, I'm going to have to ask you probably a very difficult question for a man like yourself. But do you have so far a kind of obvious favourite place, or is that kind of not a fair question to ask? Because there's probably loads of really fascinating things you've seen, but.
Oh yeah, I mean we saw about 40 different locations we went to over the series, but I mean I gave the producers like a short list before we first started, about 400. Okay, these are the ones I want to start with. I think, I think Shrewsbury Signal Box. It might sound silly, but the Shrewsbury Signal Box, which is the world's largest mechanically operated signal box, and we went up there. It's this huge signal box, and they still pull the levers, like they do across Cornwall actually now. Still, they pull the levers to control the trains, with these up and down semaphore signals using Victorian technology. But we get to go in there and see how the whole thing works, and you see like a whole panorama of the railway beneath you. Oh, it's just magic.
We often forget, don't we, about the kind of marvellous technology, as you say, in a lot of cases, still quite, I suppose, what we might think of kind of classically quite old, but fantastic technology so associated with the railways. I mean, of course, we don't have the kind of marvels of the kind of steam engines anymore, which of course were so iconic. But actually, there are still pieces of kind of technology like that you can see and use, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, often they say there's no point replacing it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
It's true. A lot of our network is still controlled with Victorian technology on the back end, because it still actually works really, really well. And often the simplest solution is the best solution. And so you see some of this stuff, on the branch lines where you don't need to have, complex signalling, and a signalman can happily just do it. So like on the St Ives branch, for example, we have got these semaphore signals because it's just one train going off down the line, just needs one signal. But yeah, it's again these buildings we see across the UK and indeed into Europe, we go as well each episode. You see that sometimes we have simple structures, sometimes we have complex structures. Some are beautiful, it's like some are really striking. Like tonight we see Rotterdam Station, which is like built in 2014, 2015, and it is so striking. I mean, it's absolutely shockingly modern, but it's beautiful, and it's there to kind of draw people into it as like kind of almost like an icon icon for the city. And then you get to go to other places where, like Great Malvern Station, where it's built 140 years ago, and it's very simple, but got sort of a simple elegance about it as well. Very different types of use, of different types of passenger, different reasons for being, but still equally interesting, just the way they're constructed.
That sounds fantastic. And Tim, kind of, going to all these different stations, around seeing all this different architecture, across the UK and across Europe as well, obviously. Do you find there's quite different and contrasting styles? I don't know if this is a silly question actually, but is there kind of completely different styles and things across the different countries in Europe and things like this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. Yes, absolutely. There are so many different influences on architectural style, and depending on the period and the location, or indeed the reason for it being there. So we must remember that railways in Britain were all built, were built because of private companies, private enterprise. These weren't government run. So you got different sort of styles of architecture, because the company had its own architects, and often you'd have uniform sort of styles for certain times whilst that architect was being employed. So the Great Western, you can generally tell a Great Western station because it has a generally sort of uniform colour and style to its painting and accessories around the thing. And they still maintain those styles today in lots of places, and they're preserved stations. But then you see it go across Europe, and you have the influences, Germanic influences, and the brick in Germany. Because obviously, of course, if you're building a railway structure, often in Victorian times, the cheapest way of doing it was to use materials not far from the site. Yeah. So because you have to bring everything in on the train. So if your railway track isn't there yet, you've got to build it with local materials. So again, you see stuff in local materials. So you might see very similar designs of architecture, but the material changes as you go, or they just adapt it slightly. And again, just what is fashionable at the time, because railways have to attract people to make money. Yes. And so they make their stuff what is fashionable or appropriate or efficient at the time, and they basically invest a lot of the time as little money as possible to make it look attractive, to make the maximum profit. Yes. That's what they've always done. It just so happens that we're very lucky in this world to have some brilliant brains who are so clever about making the most of the materials and the money available to make wonderful, interesting things that make us stop and take a second look.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm very glad they did, because now we get to see it all on your show, which is absolutely awesome. It's a lovely thing to share with people. It really is. Well, thank you, Tim. I'd love, if it's okay with you, just to point the listeners in a direction of a bit more information. I don't know if you've got any kind of obvious links. They could check it out on the UK TV website, perhaps, things like this.
Yeah. It's on the UK TV website. All the programme details. I think we're sort of putting up every couple of episodes every week, and then it's every Tuesday night at 8:00 on the Yesterday channel. And it's on UK TV Play Catch Up as well.
Fantastic, thanks so much, Tim. And you know what, last question, just as a very small thank you, but I don't know if this is putting you on the spot a little bit, so sorry about that, but I just wonder if you would like a song request, Tim. Would like to play your favourite song at all, because I will.
I would like the first record, thank you very much, I ever bought on vinyl, because I'm very old, Kylie's Locomotion.
Oh, yes, okay, nice, yeah. Of course, yeah. Well, thanks very much to Tim Dunn for coming on the show just now. It's ace having you, and what a storming song request, Tim. Nice one. Don't forget to check Tim's new show out on UK TV on the Yesterday channel. It's called The Architecture the Railways Built. Okay, it's time. It is time for any fans of gardeners out there, because next up, it's Mark Lane, the presenter of the BBC's Gardener's World. Here he is, giving us some gardening tips and also some mindfulness tips as well that you can use out in your own gardens. Here he is.
Hello. This is Mark Lane. I'm BBC gardening presenter, and I'm also a garden designer and writer.
Thank you very much, Mark. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show with us. Thank you very much indeed for coming on to Coast FM with us. Really, really keen to talk about some gardening tips and things for people, Mark.
Gardening can obviously make a real difference to your garden or outdoor space. It doesn't matter if you've got a huge estate with acres of land or just a small balcony or even a window box. gardening and nature can make all the difference. And, even if you just feel the sun on your face, wearing some sunscreen, that sun is perfect for boosting our vitamin D, which is a good mood booster. And if you love gardening, it's important to actually take the time out and just sit in the garden. And if you close your eyes, slow your breathing, in no time at all, your shoulders will drop and you'll start to feel more relaxed. And you can actually do a little bit of a mindful thing where you just become a little bit aware of where you are in the garden, and you can start focusing from your toes, going all the way up to your head, sort of clench your hands, then release them, clench your feet, then release them. Do the same all the way throughout your body, and before you know it, your body will feel so much better, and then your mood will feel better as well.
We're extremely lucky, actually. We live down in Cornwall. We've got a very small little garden, but we're very lucky to have it. It's lovely, and one of the best things about it, actually, is if you just sit there and kind of calm down, be quiet, you can hear all the seagulls in the distance at the beach, which is really nice.
Absolutely, and that's, nature is very loud if you want to listen to it, and it's brilliant to do that. And obviously, there's nothing better than bird song.
And Mark, I wonder if you had any kind of obvious tips for, and clearly this is very difficult to do over the radio, I'm aware of that, but I wonder if you had any obvious tips for people. Let's say they're kind of thinking about getting back out into the garden, and they don't know where to start. Do you have any kind of obvious tips for people like that?
Yes, I would say the first thing to do is to be prepared. So really think about what it is that you want to do and make a list. And don't try and think that you're going to achieve everything in one day, because you're never going to do that. Pace yourself, and obviously, as I said, take time out as well and relax in between. And you will actually do more by doing that. But there's lots of things that you could be doing. You can be sort of getting all your tools ready coming for the coming season, so you can sort of get rid of the rust, and then you can start cleaning them as well and sharpening them. And then of course we've got the lovely weather at the moment, so what does that mean? Weeds. We've got lots of weeds poking through, so obviously you can deal with all those weeds. You can hoe them. You can make a mixture of 2 cups of salt with 4.5 litres of vinegar and 1 teaspoon of dish soap, and spray it onto your weeds. Be careful, don't get it onto your plants though. Also, just go up there and rake the lawn, get rid of all of that debris from the winter build-up. And even if you've got a lawn, sometimes just by trimming the edges can make the lawn look so much better without having to mow the whole thing. So there's really lots to do. I mean, we've got our garden furniture is looking a bit grubby after the winter.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That needs a good scrub down. So that needs a good clean. Obviously patios and decking to do with a good clean. But, have a look at your fencing. Does your fencing need a little bit of looking after, a little bit of TLC? If so, maybe you might want to repaint it, or you might want to revarnish it, or do whatever you want with it. It's a great way of adding some colour into a garden by painting a fence. Also, why not sort of think about the chairs that you're going to be using and soft furnishings? The whole idea of a garden is really extending your house. So make the outside another room. So put some scatter cushions and some throws around your table and chairs, and it will brighten it up, and it will also be comfy.
Fantastic few tips there. Thank you for that, Mark. We've actually got a couple of friends who have been kind of doing up their garden area. We've been watching them on social media, stalking them a little bit, but it's looking fantastic. Actually, it's made us think we need to do it ourselves as well.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mark. And you know what? To say thank you for coming on the show today, I was really hoping to give you a little song request. I don't know if that's something I can interest you in at all, Mark. Can I get your favourite song on today?
Oh my gosh! I would probably have to say it's "Dancing Queen" by ABBA.
Oh yes, okay, yeah, more than happy to get that on. That's going to have to come on. Nice.
That's a great one for a sunny day.
It really is. Well, thank you, Mark. That's fantastic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Goodbye now. Well, thank you very much indeed to my 2 special guests who joined me this week. That's Mark Lane, presenter of the BBC's Gardener's World, and also a big thanks to Tim Dunn, presenter of that new series on UK TV, The Architecture the Way Was Built. It was great having you both on the show. Now it's time to take a delve into our science archive. That's right, we're going to take a listen to some of my top interviews with some fantastic leading scientists in a whole suite of different areas. Today, we're going to take a listen to this fantastic interview with Charlie Cornwallis. Really enjoyed chatting to Charlie a while back now. He's talking about major evolutionary transitions in the history of life. This includes things like multicellularity. So have you ever stopped to think about, why different living things might be multicellular, like we're multicellular, for example, contrast that with bacteria? Charlie and his team routinely think about things like that and a load of other things as well, like sexual reproduction. Why on earth does that exist? Well, Charlie's your man there. Well, let's take a listen. Very warm welcome to you. Thanks very much for agreeing to do this. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show with us.
It's great to be here.
As we were just saying, really, I mean, your area of science is just so obviously interesting, so I think I'm really keen for our listeners to hear about this. I'm not going to explain this, so I'm going to let you jump straight in there, if that's all right, Charlie, and talk a little bit about your kind of primary focus in your research group. And I'd love as well to point our listeners in the direction of websites and things at the end as well, so that listeners can hopefully follow your science and get involved in any Twitter handles like that or anything like that. Love to get those from you as well. And I'm going to give you a warning as well, Charlie, because I always like to give my guests a song request as well. Now, I've been kind to you because most people I leave that to the end and then it's a bit of a shock. So if I warn you now,
I've got to be thinking about it now.
Yeah, although it might make you a bit stressed now. But that's
I know. God, I'm not going to be able to talk about science. Just what's my favourite song?
And if you don't choose, it'll be Rod Stewart, by the way.
Okay.
I should warn you. Charlie specifically wanted. Anyway, let's get started with some of your science, Charlie. Actually, you started out actually in Sheffield, which I was pleased to see because one of my very good friends, Callum, came from Sheffield. He did his undergrad there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, moved on, and now in your lab group, really focusing on major evolutionary transitions. And I know you do a bunch of things all kind of relating to that. And your seminar later, I'm really looking forward to catching that as well. I guess I'll just let you kind of explain in your own words, though, what your kind of research focus is in your lab group.
Yeah, I started off working in Sheffield, and there I was interested in things like why do certain individuals choose mates with certain characteristics, how when individuals are competing over mates, does one win and one lose, what are the reasons for that, was what I started off being interested in. And then this got very experimental and quite specific focus, and I had a time where I thought that I wanted to broaden out, and I was really started off being motivated by biology because of the natural diversity around us. And I had this kind of realisation that I had lost that a little bit, and gone a bit too specific. So started thinking about ways in which we can study how complex life had evolved on Earth, and at that time come across this book, The Major Transitions in Evolution, and that book it's got this really nice framework whereby it says life on Earth has arisen by these different transitions. So, for example, genes have joined together to form genomes. The eukaryotic cell, which is obviously really important for producing all the energy within our bodies, that was formed through the partnership between different cells. And also multicellular organisms were the product of partnerships between unicellular or single cells. And I grew up as a bird watcher, and one of the things that you notice in the backyard is things like long-tailed tits that at this time of year all huddling together, just like people are working together. And so why have certain species form these societies where they cooperate? So all these different levels of life, you've got this kind of unifying process of individuals forming these partnerships to form more complex organisations that have certain advantages, like dividing labour or the economies of scale and these types of things. So in our research group at the moment, we're trying to explain these different transitions. So multicellularity being one, cooperative societies being another. We also look at symbioses, so partnerships between different species that enable them to kind of solve ecological problems. So we have these different projects running that are unified by the kind of same principle.
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds like an absolutely brilliant group that you run. Lots of really interesting science, and I do urge our listeners to go and check it out, actually, and see all the various different projects running. But I think if we could just kind of go through some particular things that you've just mentioned there, especially. So I think multicellularity is one of those things which everyone will just immediately find fascinating because, of course, if you think about it, and I kind of often do think about this, pretty much everything that we care about that isn't bacteria or archaea, obviously, is multicellular, right? Everything is
even
a
bacteria
eukaryote.
can be multicellular.
You can tell us more about that, I'm sure. But I mean, I think it's just so obviously important, isn't it? Figuring out, why these transitions occur. Also, I know that one of your kind of focuses has been how complexity is maintained, because of course you establish this condition where you have like a complex system from a simpler starting point. How is that maintained? And I suppose going along that line as well is this kind of idea in natural selection, of course, that it doesn't necessarily favour complexity, obviously. Complexity is just a byproduct of what's going on. But in terms of the multicellularity aspect of that, I mean, is this something which is kind of grabs your attention as well? I mean, you mentioned bacteria, though, can also do this multicellularity. Do we have any kind of leading ideas about how this actually occurred, this multicellularity?
Yeah, I mean, it's so there's a lot of fantastic work going on in this area, and as you say, it's I think something that's naturally interesting because all around us we've got these complex multicellular organisms, and how have they come from what people think of this primordial soup? And so a lot of the work that's been done in this field is trying to explain those steps. And I mean, one thing that's quite striking is that obligate multicellularity, that's you can only live in a multicellular group, has arisen only a few times. It's quite rare, something's quite special about it. And so this has really been what's driving people's interest. The problem, I think, is that all around these kind of complex multicellular organisms, we have things that are unicellular, they're living on their own, and they're being just as successful. And this really challenges this idea that complexity in itself is favoured by natural selection. If that was the case, we wouldn't see the persistence of these simple life forms. And so at the moment, a lot of our research is focusing on actually what are the ways in which single-cellular organisms cope with the same selection pressures that multicellular organisms have when they started becoming multicellular. And I used to think, multicellularity, it first arose billions of years ago on Earth and so can't be studied. But actually, things joining multicellular groups is happening all around us. And so algae in ponds, bacteria, they form multicellular groups to resist antibiotics, for example. These are processes that are going on all around us, so we can actually study this and ask, okay, what are the selective pressures, or what are the forces that are driving this group formation? And once we've characterised those, then we can say, well, how are these unicellular organisms able to cope with those same pressures? And maybe that helps us explain why on some branches of the tree of life we've got these amazing elaborate organisms, whereas in other branches of the tree of life they've remained relatively simple. And there are various things that group formation seems to allow organisms to cope with. So being eaten by predators seems really important for things like algae. Being in a group just gives you that protection against being eaten. There's also nutrient acquisition. Things like yeast are able to acquire nutrients by being in these multicellular groups. So there are these certain kind of basic requirements. Don't get eaten, acquire food, disperse to new areas that being in a multicellular group can help with. But of course, that's only one solution, and there are many defences that a single cell can have against being eaten, different ways they can acquire food and these type of things. So we are characterising the pressures that are favouring group formation, multicellular group formation, and then asking how other organisms coping with that.
Fantastic. I hadn't thought of the fact that you could find, for example, free-living bacteria or whatever, and then watch them form groups and things and compare. Thank you for that. Absolutely fantastic, because there's another kind of related area that I was really hoping to touch on as well, if that's okay with you, and of course that's sexual reproduction, because there's another one of these kind of main focuses of your research group. And I think that's really interesting because again, it's kind of one of those things that people might think of in terms of, okay, why exactly did that happen? All familiar with kind of bacteria just dividing asexually. Why do we need this kind of sexual reproduction, and why is it kind of maintained? I don't know if you've got any kind of obvious thoughts on that for our listeners.
Yeah, I think one of the go-to explanations for that is that if you reproduce asexually, then that's great because you're essentially cloning yourself. So all the genes that you have are replicated, and that's the basis of natural selection, is promoting those gene copies. So asexual reproduction obviously makes a lot of sense. But if you're facing many different pressures, the fact that you have limited genetic variation means that you might not be able to adapt, or adaptations will be less likely to arise that allow you to cope with those changing environments. And one way of getting around that is obviously to sexually reproduce. So then you're shuffling up the genetic cards, and that can lead to more beneficial gene combinations that allow you to cope with difficult ecological problems. So that's fine, and a lot of organisms obviously do sexually reproduce, but a lot of them reproduce sexually sometimes and asexually others, and that would seem like a winning strategy. So when times are tough, you reproduce sexually, and that allows you to produce offspring that can cope with those turbulent environments. But when things are stable, you go down the selfish route and just have asexual reproduction. So I think the really difficult thing to explain is why you'd be obligately sexually reproducing, and for that there's lots of good theoretical work that I think is starting to tackle this problem. But again, just like multicellularity, the distinction between being obligate and facultative is a really key one here. And why would you ever give up the right to do two things like facultative things do and commit to one particular lifestyle? And I think that's an area of active research.
Fantastic. Well, this is all sounding absolutely fascinating, Charlie. Thanks for this so far. I'd really like, if it's okay with you now, to kind of come back to the symbiosis point that we were mentioning at the beginning. And I know you kind of touched on this already as well, but because I think it's really fascinating for listeners to think about, how you can directly kind of think about that in terms of our own bodies, because of course we have symbiotic bacteria, but deeper than that, and this comes back to your kind of work on multicellularity and these kind of ideas that we've already been getting across today. But in terms of, I just think it's remarkable whenever you think about, all of my cells are only powered because of some ancient symbiosis, presumably between a pre-existing cell and the bacterial symbionts that then became the mitochondria. And I just think it's quite almost a humbling thing to think about, that actually your cells right now, you're only alive because of these symbiosis, because of this these mutualisms between different interacting partners. So I think the importance and interest of thinking about things in terms of the kind of grand scale of interacting partners producing complexity, I think that's just a fascinating point to start in biology. Yeah, absolutely. I think all these partnerships and how they've been set up and what they've enabled organisms to do is fascinating. And I mean, you mentioned the bacteria within our bodies. Actually, there are more bacterial genes than human genes in the listeners at the moment. So you're more bacteria than human. I think I grew up with the notion that bacteria were a bad thing. They're the cause of illnesses, but I think there's a real sea change now, and a realization that the microbiome, the community of bacteria within us, is actually really an essential part of who we are, what mates we choose, what diseases we're susceptible to, and these type of things. So I think it's an area of discovery at the moment, which is really nice to keep an eye on. Fantastic. And just I won't keep you for much longer, Charlie, I promise, but we'll let you escape in a minute. But I just think, just for completeness sake, I'd really like to touch on now as well yet another thing which I know your group focuses on. Again, we've already touched on this, but social living and cooperation and complex societies. And again, I think this is yet again something that listeners can think about just in everyday lives, right? I mean, they can think about why we live in such cooperative societies, or maybe they'll look at, I don't know, bees or something and wonder, okay, what makes them different to something that lives in a solitary way? And I think that's yet again this kind of transition, because I guess in all of this it's quite difficult, I know it is for me personally, to approach things with a kind of really neutral view in terms of, there's nothing special about us as humans. I think that's quite a difficult thing to establish first, right, before you then think about the benefits of group living and all of this kind of thing, because we're approaching this from the point of view of, well, we have music, we have art, we have culture, we have science. All of these things are very specific, but there's nothing special about us as humans. I know I'm sounding a bit crazy probably now. But I just think, again, this is something else which listeners can think about, I think, the group living side of things. I don't know if you could kind of, chat a little bit about that for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really interesting and rewarding to think about how our societies work in the context of other organisms. And, some parts of our lives are very unique and special, and other parts that can be understood by general evolutionary principles, and I think that's teasing those two things apart is fascinating. I think there is also a danger there of that we try and extrapolate how we operate to other animals, and what we learn from other animals we then try and extrapolate to how humans work. So I would say there's maybe a little bit or reason to be a little bit cautious there as well, but it is, I think, like you mentioned, honeybees, to see how species have evolved to organise themselves to overcome particular, say, problems or propagate more successfully, and social insects in general, honeybees, ants, have this fascinating way of organising themselves, and I think it's important for us to see that we're not any more sophisticated than other species, but that there are different ways that organisations have evolved, and what are the reasons behind that. I think is
fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Charlie. And as promised, I think I will begin to let you go now. But one key thing, your song request.
Well, this is tough. So I'm living in Sweden. I have 2 kids, and they have a favourite song that I'm not going to subject you to, which will be I Am a Hunter by Atlantis. I think that all the listeners will hunt me down and assassinate me.
Well, thanks very much, Charlie. Thanks again. And in terms of website links and things like this, Charlie, do you have them to hand, or I'll provide them with the interview, of course, but if there's anything anywhere that you'd like listeners to go that you'd like to kind of say on air, then you're welcome to do that, in terms of Twitter, anything like that.
Yeah, we try and advertise the research that's going on in the group through a website, which is charliecornwallis.org, and also have a Twitter account, it's just Charlie Cornwallis, and try and advertise the research that's going on, and that's paid by very nice taxpayers. So it's always good to get the public's opinion on these things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Charlie. In that case, we'll let you go.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Well, you know what? If there is one thing that I refuse to be called here on Coast FM, that's cowardly when it comes to music. And you know what? I'm going to play that song request. This is Hunter by Galantis. I don't care. Yeah, I'm going to play it. And what? No, I'm only joking. Hope it's not too bad anyway. It isn't, is it? No, it can't be.